deliberate political choice. I'm asking you this question, Jawar, especially considering the ruling party's political background that can be traced to a political ecosystem that predicted this nightmare, this exact nightmare scenario. How do we read it? How do we read today's reality, in your view, Jawar?
I think it's a mixture of miscalculations, wrong choices, as well as some deliberate planning by the actors. This is not something that happened suddenly. It's something we've been watching. Myself, I've been reading about this thing. I've been talking to key actors from our domestic affairs as well as from the Gulf and other actors. I've extensively traveled to these countries for last 7, 8 years. I have met with principals. I've met with people from the diplomatic, the security sides. I think I have fairly good understanding. I think the arrival of Abiy coincided with the emergence of the middle powers, particularly the Middle Eastern middle powers, consolidating their domestic security and economic capability, then starting to look beyond their borders to project their influence, to project their ambitions. Initially, there was no significant competition among themselves. When Emirates took Abiy under its wing from the get-go, by the way, they took him under the wing before he took power. And they fully consumed him, fully controlled him afterwards. If you look at the events of 2018, 2019, 2020, that's when the foundation was laid down. If you remember that huge extravaganza about Emirate coming to uplift Addis with this building of a lot of PR work. By the way, only one building was built in that site. The process of getting the Nobel Prize, then the events leading to the war. You can tell that there is earlier grooming, then there is a marriage, then there is a control. Now we are at a time when is a divorce coming, or is the marriage going to remain solid? So that's where we are. I think two things are happening for our country, which are really detrimental. Two layers of competition are coming that's affecting our politics. One is, as you alluded to it, the great power competition among the superpowers. We are at not only our country, the whole world is being shaken by what's happening. We have the rapid rise of China, and we have the American system struggling to contain itself. So this is shaking the world. Of course, our region is not immune. We are even more vulnerable. At the same time, we have these rapidly rising, highly ambitious middle powers who are scrambling on our region. So we are squashed between the superpowers who are competing among themselves, but also who are outsourcing their competition to the middle powers. And we have the middle powers who are sometimes acting autonomously, sometimes acting in collaboration with the great powers. It's so unfortunate that for Ethiopia, this is happening at the time when we are also dealing with a serious internal turmoil. And at the time when we have a leadership that is so short-sighted, walked straight into the trap. Mullah saw this, 10, 15 years ago. And even those of us who are younger, we have been reading, the signs were so clear. The cloud is gathering. It could have been possible to avoid it. But I think we got sucked into it.
So it's a mixture of, if I understand you correct, that it is a mixture of miscalculation or of deliberate political choice. I want us to discuss about the GERD, because I think right now Ethiopians are watching the space very nervously, particularly after the letter sent last week by President Trump to Egyptian President al-Sisi, but with a CC to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I don't know if Ethiopians understand the magnitude of this moment, Jawar, and I want us to reflect on that one. Because GERD has been Ethiopia's most powerful symbol of sovereign agency, right? But suddenly it finds itself in this most aggressive narrative around it. And it's coming from Washington and not Cairo. I'm not doubling down when I ask you again, when we see the area where the Gulf money is influencing the Horn of Africa, including Ethiopia. And at the same time, you have the most powerful person in Washington clearly siding with Cairo. I want you to share with us, what does it mean when a country's symbol of independence is reframed by someone else? What is the danger? What are we looking at of this renewed involvement of President Trump, reframing and asserting GERD's reality in Egypt's favor? What are Ethiopians looking at, Jawar? How can we prepare ourselves for it?
Look, this is not a new development. This dates back to 2019 again. The GERD, the Nile politics was made part of the Abraham's Accord. That's where the issue started. Let me tell you a story. This is in 2019. When Abiy goes to Sochi in Russia, he signs the preliminary agreement with Al-Sisi. He comes back to Ethiopia. I don't know if you remember this incident where he was promised $7 billion, and he comes and he tells us, he tells me actually. And I said, why are the West giving you $7 billion? His answer was, because they like my idea. Which idea? He said, the Madember idea. It didn't make sense to me. And I went back, I did research, I had a conversation with diplomats and with a different group of people, that we realized that all this thing was connected to GERD. And as you remember, during Trump 1, the GERD issue went from the African UN mechanism, it went to the US. And even in the US, instead of the usual State Department diplomatic engagement, it went to the Treasury. And we had to scramble. A lot of the senior diplomats started to scramble to force him to withdraw from that. What President Trump did now is nothing new. He just resurrected that initiative from 2019-2020. Look, back in the day, we were able to resist because we were relatively stronger. Ethiopian society was relatively stronger. Internally, although we had a lot of political contradiction, we were going through this tumultuous transition, we were relatively okay. So we were able to resist it. But now, internally, we are socially fragmented, politically fragmented. Our security is not where it was. One. Second, diplomatically, in 2019, although the President Trump came clearly on the side of the Egyptians, the push was not that strong. Trump 2 is a lot more aggressive, a lot more assertive, as we can see in different other cases, than Trump 1. Another issue is, in 2019, although different countries for different reasons in the Middle East do kind of politically and diplomatically show some sympathy for Egypt, they were not aggressive. They didn't have a stake in the game to stand against us. Now, we have become part of the Middle Eastern political competition. Ethiopia is clearly on the side of Emirates. It has become the vassal. It has become the state that pretty much facilitates transportation of weapons and soldiers and others, even giving training ground inside our land for the war in Sudan. Saudi is against this. Saudi is trying to squeeze Emirates out of the region. Now Saudi has a vested interest to take side with Egypt. So now we are dealing with Egypt plus US and plus Saudi. That is a powerful coalition. And that's quite resisting and surviving that level of pressure. Financial pressure, diplomatic pressure, and security pressure without cutting ties with Emirates, without recalibrating our engagement, diplomatic and security engagement, without focusing on restoring domestic stability and domestic cohesion, I think that will be difficult. And we've been squeezed from both from the river and the sea, from the Nile River and from the Red Sea. And the political Red Sea that Abiy tried to push, a very short-sighted, untimely push, has helped Egypt to box us between the river and the sea.
Mm, mm. Speaking of this pressure, I think it's important for us to be also remember that in October 2020, President Trump, during his first presidency, has threatened that Egypt would, I quote him, blow up the dam, perish the thought. But in recent weeks, also, he has repeatedly claimed that the US financed GERD. And now this latest letter, which unsurprisingly was also CC'd to UAE and Saudi Arabia, as I alluded to earlier. Now he is saying that he put GERD mediation at the top of his agenda. And also forcibly said during his meeting at the Davos World Economic Forum meeting that he made the claims that the dam stops the flow of the water to Egypt. So when we talk about that external pressure, this is a very serious pressure that Ethiopia is facing. I think everybody could agree to that. And at the same time, Jawar, the ruling party asserts that the GERD is a national interest. And there are so many things that are going for a national interest nowadays. And I don't have any disagreement by saying that the GERD is a national interest. I treat it as such. But the party remains mute against this repeated misrepresentation and pressure, Jawar. How are Ethiopians going to get mobilized to even say no, to even revive our slogan that we campaigned for, saying, "It is my dam"? How should Ethiopians protect this national treasure of theirs against this kind of forceful, when the ruling party that is governing the country chooses silence against this kind of assertion? What needs to be done, Jawar, in your opinion?
I have a difficulty really taking a stand these days. President Trump repeats that the US financed the project. As far as we're concerned, Ethiopian people financed it. There are two contradictions that have emerged over, there is a narrative that this is self-reliant, full Ethiopian financed with our blood, with our tears, with our money, with our prayers, right? That was the narrative that built the GERD. But two things happened over last year. Before President Trump said the US financed it, there was a speech by Abiy at some meeting, if you remember, where he said the Ethiopian people's contribution to GERD is only 12 billion. At that point, we're like, what is he talking about? Is he trying to create distinction between the Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian government? Isn't the money of the government also money that is generated from the public? Are we sure that when Trump says we financed it, there is no truth to it? Earlier, I mentioned about this conversation I had with Abiy in 2019, 2020, where he was also publicly saying that they gave us 7 billion to finance this Madammer thing. I think there is need for transparency from the Ethiopian government. When they refuse to say anything about it, when it's blatantly saying, we financed this project, the Americans are saying, the American president saying, we financed the project.